beyond anything we can set up. So you can say that the heavens align properly. And the final stage is more the initial stage, the work we can do. So what needs to be done in the mind-heart dimension is retreating from untruth. Somehow, we keep our fingers crossed, we try, and life helps us. It shows us that what we believe ourselves to be isn't the whole truth, it isn't accurate. And you can pare your self-definition down to the final self-belief you have, but you can't undo that. That belief can't undo itself. And so you find at some point, or maybe in retrospect, you get the feeling that you started off 95% of the path was pushing, striving toward a goal, but at some point you reach a stage where it's almost like our center we become pulled magnetically into the center. There's no longer, you don't know which way to turn, which way to run. It feels like you've backed up to a blank wall, or you're on the edge of an abyss. And so the final stage, when that happens, it's Rose felt there was help. That was definitely my feel. I think most people recognize that things are set up for that final transition, that there's no way the mind could figure out how to do it. And when that happens, you're pulled back. So nirvana, the term nirvana means blown out. I think in Rose's case, he was blown out. In my case, I was old enough and the ego had eroded enough so that by the time it happened, it was whispered out. It wasn't traumatic for me. And so a lot of people are around Rose, like Bob Sergel. He said, I figured they were going to have to carry me out on a stretcher if it ever happened. Yeah. So that was the impression I had. Yeah. But that final transition is, and my suspicion is we'll never be able to describe exactly what that is, what the transition is between, you could say, the known, this dimension here, and the unknown, what we really are. I think that will always remain a mystery. So I think I'm going a little bit over my time. Let's see if there's anything else I want to. I was going to read a couple of poems to you, but that's going to take too long, so you can look them up. They're available on the internet. Franklin Merrill Wolff, the mathematician I mentioned, he was shocked to find, shortly after his realization, that he was writing poetry. He never had written a poem in his life, couldn't stand poetry, But some of the poetry he wrote shortly after his realization is dynamite. And there's a pair of poems that I think is particularly beautiful and moving. One's called Samsara, in other words, this dimension. The other is Nirvana. So those are available on the internet. Look those up sometime if they sound like something you'd be interested in reading. The other thing I was going to, in terms of talking about how do we do it, the way, it's both perplexing and very simple. The idea of the perplexion part of it is that the closer you get toward the truth in this dimension, the more it becomes paradoxical. In St. John of the Cross, in the ascent of Mount Carmel, he had a diagram, and he had, maybe a dozen little quatrains of poetry about the paradox of getting there. And that's very worthwhile. If it sounds like it might be something to be appealing to you, I won't read it. Ramana Maharshi, you're probably familiar with him, the Indian guru of the 20th century, one of the two that I think was worth reading. Maybe they all are. The two things that stuck out in my mind when I was trying to think what his message were. One is steady persistence. And basically that's all I can say too. When people ask me how it happened, I say, well, the only thing I can say is I just stuck with it. And I suspect that's going to be true for anybody. Some people are going to make it faster. Some people are slow learners like me, but somehow you stick with it. The other thing Ramana Maharshi mentioned is sinking into the heart. I don't think he ever talked much about that, and I don't remember in any of the dialogues as people asking him too much about it. But a couple of weeks ago, a fellow I've known for quite a few years had written me, and he was asking me something, and it occurred to me to tell him, I don't know where this came from. Lots of times this stuff just seems to come out of nowhere, but I said, you need to dive deeply one time to find the pearl beyond price. And the pearl beyond price is something that has stuck with me from that Merrill Wolff poem, the Nirvana poem. I'm sure it's a phrase that people have used before to try to talk about this kind of stuff. So I said, all you need to do is dive deeply one time to get the pearl beyond price. And of course he wrote back and said, well, how do you do it? And I could have said something to him, but I thought, this wouldn't be nearly as valuable as I said, this is a perfect topic for contemplation. by contemplation, I explained a little bit, but I think I was basically talking about the same thing I was mentioning to you about learning to turn you have a topic. You can't really force yourself to think about a topic, but you have a general question or, or quest. So, and then you learn when you contemplate, you turn your head away from irrelevant thoughts and feelings that come in. You postpone those. I can eat dinner later. I can get a beer later. And if you have to scratch your nose, you scratch your nose. You don't have to wait to do that. So I said that would be a perfect topic for your contemplation. He agreed, but I haven't heard back from him since then. And when he wrote back, I thought about this a little bit, and when he wrote back, I was going to say, sometimes the way you can get, so diving is a doing, right? Mm-hmm. So that requires doership. And so when we're still at the level of feeling, even though we can say intellectually, oh, I see I'm not really doing things that I know from neurological research that the brain is sending a message to my arm before I'm even aware of it to move. I know I'm not the doer, but I still feel that somehow I'm influencing this stuff. So while we still have the conviction we're the doer, we need to do things. So the path is still about doing. So that would be diving. How do I dive in? But then I was going to say that the opposite, the flip side of the coin. So that's the active side of the coin. The flip side of the coin is sinking. So after you contemplate, how can I dive for a certain period of time, the mind gets tired of that, runs out of ideas. Look at the flip side of the coin. What prevents me from sinking into the heart? And so if somebody asked the question, so if I had said to him, all you need to do is sink into the heart, and then he would say how to do that, and what could I say? I'd say, well, it's the wrong question, because it's not a question about doing. Sinking is passive. Mm-hmm. So the question is really, what prevents me from sinking into the heart? See what I'm getting at? Whenever you want to tackle one of these problems, you can always flip the coin and look at the other side, and you may get some new ideas, impressions, or whatever. And my conviction, although I wouldn't necessarily tell them this, but my conviction is what prevents the flotation devices that prevent sinking are the beliefs we have about what we are. There are those roots hanging out from the side of the cliff that when we start falling in the abyss, we have something to grab onto. So, to me, what has to be done is the ego has to get out of the way momentarily. We call that ego death. The ego doesn't really die, but when you know what you are, the ego is part of the being. You're not identified with it anymore. If you come back, I mean, the body could just die that one, I suppose. That would be the end of the problem. But the flotation, so there were three, what has to happen when the mind opens, you get a new view. And that's also the point of surrender when the mind opens, if it isn't immediately closed by fears or competing desires and fears. So surrender is the point that has to occur. And all surrender is a form of dying. So that basically happened to me 3 times in my life. The first time when I was 10 years old. I was out, my dad and I had gone to a hunting camp that he and some of his friends had north of where we lived. It was in the wintertime. It was late winter, early spring. It had been a hard winter, and he was wondering about whether the deer would get anything to eat. He just wanted to get out of the house. Of course, that was a mistake, because whenever he went out of the house, my mother threw some of the stuff away. She didn't want extra stuff in the house. So he knew there was a price to pay. So we went up there, and we took skis and snowshoes, and he said, what do you want to use, skis or snowshoes? Well, snowshoes are a lot of work. I'm not the kind of person who wants to do a lot of work, so I said, let's ski. It turned out to be a mistake, because we got into a swampy area, and we sunk up to our armpits in the snow. Yeah. And I struggled a little bit, and I was not much of a struggler either, So I struggled a little bit, and I said, Dad, I can't move anymore. The next thing I remember is being in the car. Yeah. So it was I surrendered. I just couldn't struggle anymore. And blackness is what I got. And when you read these near-death experiences, that even though Morris didn't point that out, that's the most common thing. Even when you get anesthesia, the most common thing is no memory, just blackness. So in retrospect, I'm making some conclusions about this stuff that may be off base. But to me, my mind, when it opened, it couldn't open all the way because of whatever the beliefs were I still had about myself. I'm a little boy, X, Y, Z. The next time it happened, funnily enough, when I just thought about this a couple of weeks ago, these 3 experiences were 25 years apart. So when I was 34, I was out in California for the first time in my life. I went for a swim in the Pacific Ocean, got caught in a riptide. I'd never heard of such a thing. And so I got caught in this tide that was pulling me out, and I didn't like the ocean to start with. And so I just flailed with my arms and legs. I was damned if I was going to get pulled over to Hawaii, you know. And, after a while, my arms and legs, my muscles were just, they became like spaghetti, you know. They just don't work anymore. And when that happened, I gave up. It shocked me at the time. I even realized at the time, wow, I had no fear that I was, whatever the ultimate fear is while I was flailing. But when I recognized my arms and legs just aren't going to work anymore, I gave up. There was no fear, and I lost body consciousness. But I got a life review. And you hear that about sailors and near drowning experiences, so it may have something to do with that particular form of near death. And this life review, it started from the earliest times, and it was like it was coming up a tree trunk, and I had the conviction, although I didn't test it out, so I don't know if it was accurate or not, that I could go down any of those branches and see as much detail about any of those experiences I wanted to. And it came from, you know, the oldest back up to the more current time. I don't remember exactly where it stopped. But then the next thing that occurred is I felt my knees dragging on the sand, and I was a quarter of a mile up the beach. All that flailing, whatever, it kept me going sideways, I guess. And so that was it. The second time when I surrendered to death. And the third time was the final realization. And I think because by that time, and as part of the final realization, what happened is that the mind, so we talk now about being aware of awareness or staring awareness, but we can't really do it. That comes very late in our search and our struggle. Rose put it, is Jacob's ladder, if you're familiar with that, or maybe we can talk about it a little bit later or whatever. It was 3 triangles stacked on top of each other, and he said this is primarily what he thought the sort of generic path that everybody went through on the way to becoming the truth, knowing the truth about themselves. In the final triangle, the baseline goes from observing all the mind's operations, the part of the mind that this stuff is always, we're watching it, but we're just not conscious of it, you know, like the decision-making process. If we had to consciously watch it all the time, we wouldn't be able to move our feet. There'd be too much going on. You know? But the final triangle, the baseline, goes from the process observer that's watching everything that's going on in the mind to individual consciousness of awareness. And when that happens, it may be that these glimpses that people get, that Harding tries to set up in the experiments, they may be flashes of that. But at some point, that what happened with me, and it's not going to be the same for everybody, but basically, the final belief you have about yourself has to come up against a contradictory view, and something has to give. And so when that happens, then that's what causes a transition. That's what, sort of, you have to be careful. You don't want to say this with too many psychiatrists around, but that's what takes you beyond the mind, out of the mind, before the mind. So I think that's basically what I had to say, probably a little more than I should say. So let's take a few minutes if you have any questions, and then everybody get up and try a little experiment.
All right, can you say who you are now?
I know what I am. Yes. And my conviction is that when you know what you are, it's the same. And my conviction is that is the only sentient being. That only being is sentient. And so these body minds, to me, are not sentient creatures. That we don't. In other words, we don't see. Our eyes don't see. And I'd say we see with the eyes, but the eyes don't see. We see what we really are, sees with the mind, but the mind doesn't see. There's no TV camera in there and somebody sitting in a chair, TV screen, you know.
Can you talk about this giving up, this total, this death that you're speaking about?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think I'm at the point. I mean, I don't come from the same background and tradition. I use different language, but I feel that all my effort has led up to this end point, mm-hmm. where there's nothing more struggle for, but at the same time I can't force this giving up. I still have this reference point of, you know, I still see the edges in my hands, and I still see these, and I have a strong belief in them still.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's what causes my suffering. And I also know that giving up is, I've felt it before, you know. So I mean, if you could explore that a little bit more.
You know, it's a conundrum because we can't give up.
No.
Yeah. And in fact, looking back over the path, you may get the feeling that all the things I thought I was giving up, they were taken away. I didn't give up anything. Some things, it's just like as you see more and more of the mind's operation, some things out here change, some things don't. But the significant changes in the seer location, you could say the seer's changing. The seer isn't, but you know the view that the seer is getting is broadening. Yeah, so giving up is the mind needs that conundrum. There has to be either you know the balloon has to be fully deflated, and either the balloon is going to pop if some trauma does it, or the air just leaks out. Like in my case, the air leaks out over a long period of time. There's going to be a final deflation. It's less painful if it occurs over a long period of time, but who wants to wait around? You know, if you could get there earlier, it'd be better.
I think what I find is that there's no bargaining with this. You can't say, well, I'll give up this.
Rose used to say,
you know,
be very careful of making a commitment, because if you make a commitment, you won't be able to sleep comfortably. Yeah, and so I didn't tell you about the two Rose, the very simple things about Rose. One was commitment. And you thought that was very valuable, but you had to. And to me, what commitment is not like New Year's Eve, where you make the resolution, I'm going to twist my arm to do something I don't want to do. But it's actually just looking in and seeing what you really want. And when you see what you really want, who wouldn't make that their top priority, right? So for a 16-year-old teenager, what I really want is a red convertible, you know. But, no, it doesn't have to be the ultimate what I really want. But whatever, when we see what we really want, we damn well want to get it. We don't want to fool around. So
there's no options, in other words. You have to find out.
We don't want an option, do we?
No, no, but I think, I mean, for myself, it's a lot of experimenting with things that weren't, that I thought might be the truth, but they turned out to be disappointments. And
that's exactly the path.
Yeah, the managements that I tried to do to find the truth.
Yep.
And now I feel that there is only one truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
even that's a slippery slope, because when you got one, you've also got many. The mind can't conceive of one thing.
No.
And in fact, if you think about it, this whole manifestation is impossible, because where did the first thing come from?
Right.
So there had to be a first atom or something, right, for this complex vibration of millions and billions and trillions of atoms. Where did the first one come from? The mind can't conceive of no thing. It's always, the closest you can get is oneness, but that's not the truth either.
No. Well, I think the mind has to come to exhaustion. I mean, it feels, for me at least, you know.
Well, in my case, it's definitely a giving up.
Okay.
In my case, it was I was on a week-long retreat, and it was the final night of the retreat. I'd saved going down to the lake to watch the sun set over the lake for that final night, and I came back after that, and I was sitting in a chair, nothing left to do. That was, honest to God, the first time I left where I thought to myself, I'm sitting here and I'm not doing anything. What an amazement. I've never sat in a chair and not done something, even if it was meditation, you know. Yeah. So I'd given up. It wasn't any dramatic giving up. I just thought, well, it's been another solitary retreat in a long line of solitary retreats, and I haven't gotten the final breakthrough yet, but apparently that's the way it's going to be, you know, for now. And so I just was weighing, or whatever you call it, doing nothing. And that's, so yeah, I think that it may either be explosive turmoil that does it, or like in my case, just the mind finally just relaxed. Yeah.
There's this giving up is, can you say that this giving up is a letting go of results-oriented thinking? I mean, we are striving for...
I wouldn't say it's that, no. I would
No?
say it is surrender to the truth. Surrender to the truth of what the mind sees. So I could make an argument, although this might be misleading, but the truth has never been hidden. It's always been in plain view. But the mind is holding on to beliefs that prevent it or allow it to not accept the truth of what it sees.
You've said before, I think, something in fact, to believe what you finally see. Do you recall making that kind of a statement? When you finally get that recognition, you finally believe what you see,
No,
and you don't.
The mind shouldn't. The mind should still doubt it. The mind's proper function is to doubt, to question and doubt. Yeah. So I think you may find almost anybody who's had, like when Rose came out of his realization, he thought maybe I've gone nuts. And in fact, when I came out of my realization, one of the first things that hit my mind is I know exactly what Rose was talking about. This is nuts. From what you'll know from the mind's perspective is insane. Yeah. So so different mentalities will struggle with that for a while. It may take a while for the mind to. The distinguishing factor is what you know about yourself is a different form of knowing. It's not the mind's. The mind has a couple forms of knowing, and this is a completely different form of knowing. And so I tell you, doubt this. This mind could be deluded or whatever, but in terms of from inside, the suffering is gone. So it's settled the mind. The mind has bowed to its master, you could say. And you can't have two masters, so almost everybody on the path is trying to serve two masters. Right? 22. And eventually, their demands will conflict. And so that's basically what's going on all the time, is the struggle between the fears and desires. So there are a dozen idiots in there who are taking turns being our master. We're identified with this fear and that desire and whatever. And so eventually that stuff all sorts itself out.
And before you had this self-realization, did you have flashes of it previous to that?
No.
There's nothing on the...
No, I would, in fact, 25 years after I started, I felt like I was back at the point I'd been 25 years earlier. I had many satori experiences, which is the term, I probably used the term wrong, but to me they're insights. And those would come as instantaneous pictures, although I don't have a particularly pictorial mind, but instantaneous views, or I don't know, and then my mind would try to understand, maybe, interpret what the view was. So those were flashes, but they were, I knew, and I think that was from being around Rose, that even though some of them were very impressive, I knew they weren't the final realization. Yeah, but no, there's no partial enlightenment. It's really either or proposition. Yeah.
What would you say were the traps of the intuition?
Well, I was shocked that intuition comes with conviction, because before I consciously experienced intuition, I could argue 16 sides of any issue. And when intuition hit me, and I could, the times when it has hit in that kind of a strong form, it comes with a conviction that it's absolutely right. And so the trap is, there is no absolute right in this dimension. And so I know many people who are intuitional, and every whim is an intuition. In other words, they feel that the proper thing to do is act on every whim. So the trap there is discernment, of discerning the whims from true intuition. or higher intuition might be a better way to say it. So some people, their intuition tells them where the sale of beans in town is they've got the best sale of beans, you know? And it's intuition. They pick it up seemingly out of nowhere. But they'd have to, and so then anything that hits the mind that way, they think I've got the truth now, and they don't remember the next day when a contrary intuition hits the mind. Oh, yesterday I was convinced X, now I'm convinced not X, you know? So I'd say that's a trap, it's a rut. And so those people would have to apply, you could say, the common sense logic type of thinking to try to discern and distinguish. Whereas the intellectual people have convictions, oh, I can't do anything for sure, and you know, this argument's as good as the next argument. And the best thing to do is just to not take any position. You know, depending on how sophisticated your intellect is, it runs you right into the rat hole every time.
Art, those times that you switched when you gave up, those times weren't actually any intellectual, it wasn't from the mind that...
Not at all.
No,
Oh,
no. But I mean, before, I mean, you have, well, this is the only tool that we have as separate feeling beings
Yeah.
that we are.
Yeah, the mind can't, in the final analysis, it can't do the final, take the final step, it can't undo itself.
Right.
Yeah. But, so basically what it is, the way I feel about it is, what we are is hypnotized by the mind. If your life weren't interesting enough, you'd lose interest and the body would die. Right? You, the real you, would lose interest. Yeah, so it has to have enough drama to satisfy that personality so it's still entertaining.
Right.
And so what we are becomes hypnotized by the view. And many younger people, if you ask them what's important, more experience, I need more experience, they're identified with what they experience. They haven't gotten the hint yet that they're what's experiencing, not what's being experienced. And so the mind is it's basically what we are projects into a split world, projects a split world. So the world isn't here when we're sleeping. Those people will say, oh yeah, you were asleep last night, I saw you lying there. They're